You're the best friend I got. You're the only friend I've got, that's for sure. Well, you're definitely not getting cold in this costume. Greetings, comic lovers, and welcome back to Casually Comics, the channel where we chat all things comics, reviews comics new and old, to history to anecdotes, really wherever our whims take us. Marvel and DC, two iconic comic book companies with a long-standing rivalry. It's been friendly at points, more antagonistic at others, sometimes pure marketing, and sometimes some combination of all of the above. But there were periods where these two companies have been on good enough terms to produce some very interesting collaborations. One such arose in the early 2000s under the form of Just Imagine, or I guess we're calling them the aughts now, time of recording. The series, Just Imagine ellipses, would later be collected under the title Just Imagine Stan Lee Created the DC Universe, which is a pretty solid synopsis of what the series was. Just Imagine was a 13-issue miniseries that ran from 2001 to 2002, in of which Stan Lee of Marvel fame, and many well-known Marvel co-creator credits, reimagined iconic DC characters alongside some of the top artistic talent working for DC at the time. The whole thing was meant to be a friendly exercise. And as of 2022, when I'm filming this, it feels a bit like it was a blip, like it came and went. Today we're going to be looking at the first of this series, released in September of 2001, which was Just Imagine Stan Lee with Joe Kubert Created Batman. Batman was one of the DC characters that Lee was fairly fond of, or at least thought was a good idea or a marketable one, so it's not surprising that he would start there. In my constant search for quotes, I stumbled across an interesting interview. In it, he talks about being friends with Batman credit stealer Bob Kane. And not that I ever wanted to have dinner with Bob Kane, you know, if you play those games like which famous dead person you want to have dinner with, but this clip cemented that I definitely do not want to have dinner with Bob Kane.
He would go to a restaurant with me, we'd have dinner. Minute the waiter came over. Do you know who I am? I'm Bob Kane. I created Batman. Here, I'll draw you a picture. I wanted to crawl under the table. I would never say anything like that.
It's years removed from this happening, and the secondhand embarrassment is reaching forward through time to clutch me. Do you know who I am is never a cool play. Oh. Even if it's not pulled for clout and it's just excitement, it's still, oh no, please stop. At the start of this issue is admittedly a nice couple of paragraphs. They're written by Lee, allegedly, about what the purpose of Just Imagine is, which I'll read because I feel like it really sets the tone. Get ready for dramatic reading or just regular reading. Hi, true believers. I want to emphasize that this project is intended as a heartfelt tribute to the talented artists and writers who have created DC's greatest heroes. Anybody can come along later on after the hard work has been done and write a different version of some famous feature. Truth. Please don't think for 1 minute that this is an attempt to improve on any of the truly great characters that have become legendary throughout the world. The new versions in this series are merely a fun exercise, a chance to work with some of the best artists in comicdom, a chance no writer could refuse. So I hope you enjoy this somewhat different look at a few of your favorite heroes, and remember, the version you're about to read owes its very existence to the true masterworks that came before it. Excelsior! So in a way it is interesting to approach these as a pleasant thought exercise. Can another creator working through their lens create a similar yet unique character who still carries through the core theme of the original? As they are meant to be tributes, so they won't have fully succeeded if they come across like an entirely different character just bearing the name. We can't have an in-name only kind of thing. There's gotta be some connective thread that you would still look at that and be like, that's insert character name there. Kind of like Tangent was trying to do. Tangent went way too far sometimes. Sometimes for the better, sometimes for the worse. I thought it would be neat to take a look at some of these and see what we think. For fun. Fun is allowed here. Can Marvel's version of Batman carry the title? You know what that means. This video is brought to you by Established Titles. Established Titles is a project based on a historic Scottish custom where landowners are referred to as lairds or lords and ladies in English. With Established Titles, you can buy a small piece of the Scottish countryside. Very small. This in the service of both reforestation and afforestation. Both ways. And you get this nice handy dandy plaque with your lord status on it. You can blind people with the lights like I'm doing right now. Title packs give you at least 1 square foot of dedicated land on a private estate in Edelston, Scotland. And an official certificate with a crest. Your certificate features a unique plot number with which you can see the exact location of your land. Established Titles told me that the first 200 people purchasing a title pack using my link will effectively be next to my plot. Within a few minutes or walking distance will be lairds of the trees. Established Titles looks to help preserve the picturesque woodlands and biodiversity of Scotland. We plant a tree with every order and work with global charities One Tree Planted and Trees for the Future to support global reforestation efforts. It can also make a great gift for yourself or for someone you love. A title makes a great gift all year round. I got this one from my dad and he was kind enough to let me have it to film with, but I need to give it back post haste. Some also really enjoy the titling aspect and go hard. You could also officially change your name to Lord or Lady and get it on your credit card, plane tickets, etc. Established Titles is running a big sale right now, and if you use the code CasuallyComics, you get an additional 10% off. Go to establishedtitles.com/casuallycomics to get your gifts now. Whether you choose to layer it over someone or not, let's meet the Marvel version of Batman. This version is named Wayne Williams, and yes, that's also the same name as the convicted Atlanta child murderer. I guess no one noticed or looked into the name. No research at all. They must have just thought it was a nice sounding alliteration, and the Wayne is there most likely as a tribute to Bruce Wayne. You gotta check names. Like, sure, somebody out there probably has the same name at some point, but there are some connections that are best left avoided if you can. And Wayne Williams was definitely one of them. He was arrested in 1981. This came out in 2001. There was time. Wade Wilson didn't have to worry about this. The cover shows us a glimpse of what our Batman is going to look like. Much more realistic Bat than Shadow Bat. It is definitely a vivid mask that sticks with you. It looks like one of those Twilight Zone masks where you take it off and your face is now stuck in the mask shape. In the comic proper, we open on a gloomy, rainy night, kind of like the one I'm filming in. We've got some moody narration boxes to set the tone. The night is dark and starless. The pounding rain is cold, but the heart of Wayne Williams is colder still, for it beats with a silent, seething rage. This is the funeral for Wayne's father, who died in the line of duty. He was a police officer. Wayne and his mother are attending, and all of this has left Wayne cynical and bitter. While his mother feels that his father died doing his duty, Wayne feels it wasn't worth it. Perhaps that it wasn't his responsibility, per se. Wayne knows that his father spent his life trying to make a difference, and for what? Their neighborhood's still terrible. He even talks about maybe it would be better to just embrace it, embrace a gang, join them. On the way home, they see someone local being beat up by the head of one of the gangs. Hands with a Z, Horgum. Every time I say Z, I forget that other people don't say Z. In Canada, we say Z, or we're supposed to. I know a lot of people say Z up here too, but Z. W, X, Y, and Z. It's in my blood, I can't get it out. Color with a U. His mother tries to get involved and stop this beatdown, but Wayne stops her, going so far as to say that the man being beaten probably deserves it. He says though it was just to ensure they didn't get into any trouble, but it's still not his most endearing moment. At this point, Wayne is being shown as a person willing to throw others under the bus to protect himself and his loved ones, but also himself. It does leave room for growth, but it's a bit harsh. He could have said we don't want any trouble to the same effect, which would have lined up with the fact that he's gonna have more problems with Hans later on. Keep wanting to say Hans, it's just gonna become Hans, so I gotta say Hans. The next day, Wayne has to go back to his convenience store job, which he hates. He's got a terrible boss, and he's complaining how he was gonna quit, but now because his father is dead, he can't because his mom will need help with the bills. Outside, he sees Hans walking with his girl and admires him. He may be just a hood, but he sure lives the big life. Any guy who could rate a foxy chick like that. Foxy? It's 2001. First you get the money, then you get the power, then you get the woman. And don't get high for your own supply. Well, the big hood life gets you nearly gunned down in a drive-by shooting. Now, unlike the night before, while there is still imminent danger to him and the people around him, this time there's a hot chick. So Wayne runs outside and pushes her out of the way. There are some lines about how she's standing there, frozen, but it's a bit undercut because in the prior scene he had no desire to help that last person. But this one's preceded by, dang, she foxy. Hans doesn't take kindly to this, largely because he did not attempt to save his girlfriend, just dived out of the way. So he tries to earn back some lost boyfriend points by beating up Wayne. He nearly crushes his hands because his hands are so strong. But I'm just distracted by the fact that the back of his jacket says hands, no feet. So no kicking in his gang, no Jean-Claude Van Damme movies. What does it mean? The whole thing kind of backfires for Hans because it just makes his girlfriend feel sorry for Wayne and she's begging him to stop, so he does. But he tells Wayne not to make any future plans because the next day he frames him for armed robbery. Hans works quick. He bursts into the convenience store, masked up with some goons, and starts yelling at Wayne like, "Thanks for the tips, Wayne. This was a great spot, Wayne." So at least it's actually a semi-competent frame-up. It's also aided by the fact that Wayne yells you didn't have to shoot him after they shoot the convenience store owner, which doesn't sound great to anybody observing. It is something that someone would say, but in the context, it doesn't sound great. They also plant the gun in his hand. That, coupled with the boss's dislike of him, end up with him being convicted. And then he goes to prison, so he adds some Luke Cage to that Spider-Man they had going on earlier. He knows that Hans framed him, and so he swears vengeance. And this will become the crux of his motivation, his personal vendetta against Hans. He's stuck on sewing, and he isn't faring very well at first. He's trying to keep his head down, but he's kind of becoming a target. He's really lonely until he befriends a bat. They're flying by his window. He manages to lure one in with some food. It's the Birdman of Alcatraz now, but with bats. Ugly as he is, he kind of grows on you. Take your time, little guy. I figure the longer I stay here, the better you'll look to me. You're the best friend I got. You're the only friend I've got, that's for sure. I love that he befriended a bat, as depressing as that is. And it is a nice take on the bat flew through my window, which was Bruce's inspo. Also, I love how the bats are drawn this issue. There's a lot of detail in them most of the time. We do get some interludes and cutaways to Hans gloating about how he framed Wayne because he's petty like that, and to his girlfriend Nita not being into that. Meanwhile, while Wayne sees an older prisoner being beaten up in the weight room, he decides to break his previous MO. He's gonna help someone with no pre-existing hotness context. He once more gets beat up. This time no one crushes his hands though. That's my problem, I guess. I shoot off my mouth without thinking. I mean, not really. Shooting your mouth off would be more like you go and try and start trouble. When you go to the situation, you try and antagonize people. It's very different to go try and help, and then if they say something back. It's hard to de-escalate when someone is crushing your hands. I'd argue that his problem is not that he's shooting his mouth off, that he isn't really consistent in feeling like he has an inner desire to help people, which is fine and puts him more on a noir protagonist plot trajectory, but it's not the most Batman thing. But now he's met Frederick Grant, who he saved, and who encourages him to improve himself, and he does this via montage. He hits the weights, he hits the books, he gets swole, he gets smart, he joins a gang for protection, and his desire for vengeance is strengthened when he gets a letter that says that his mom died, and this means that she died before he could prove his innocence. None of this would have happened if not for Hans. Hans He'll pay for this, I swear it on my mom. What ends up getting Wayne out of prison is his sort of Spider-Man moment. There's a riot and the other prisoners are gonna kill the warden, but he stands up to them and won't let them because no one should be killed for just doing their job, he says, and it shows a thought bubble to show that he's thinking about his dad in his head. This is the best intervention he's had so far in this story because there's a clear connection to the source of what he's feeling. His headspace, which is still very much vengeance, but you can follow it. It comes across less like he wants to defend people who he views are just standing up for their duty and more like my dad died and that bothers me, so in this specific instance I'll stop this. That's the thing with Wayne. As he stands, you're never sure if he'll help or not, but he definitely will if you're a hot chick or if you're the person who's gonna help him build his tech later like Grant. Now this action gets him pardoned, and we see that Hans is still obsessed with him reading the paper and talking about it, and that Nita is trapped in an emotionally abusive relationship with him and potentially maybe a slightly physical one too. It's not a good relationship, that is hardly surprising. We've seen what Hans has been up to this entire book. Now despite the fact that Wayne doesn't really have anything on Hans and isn't really credible enough to do anything because Hans has risen up in the ranks so much, Hans still puts a hit on him because he's just like that. Better safe than sorry. So Wayne and his pet bat, unnamed, who he brought with him from prison, go into hiding. And he goes from season 1 to 3 Cisco to season 4 and beyond Cisco, but only with part of a mustache, not a full goatee beard. He also knows that he needs money. As mentioned, Hans has worked his way up to controlling the city. So Wayne needs to raise his own status. He turns on the TV and it's a Marvel staple. Wrestling. Time to Spider-Man up some more. But stick with the wrestling this time, like What If number 19. Only not become a crazed producer. Wayne decides he will become a famous wrestler, because with his fighting skills from prison, he will be the best. Inspired by his bat friend, he makes a truly monstrous in the best way bat costume and dubs himself Batman. It's very unsettling. This would be terrifying coming upon you at night. I kinda love it. And he's just insta-successful. Goes in, beats one person up, they sign him instantly, and he's on his way. His gimmick is admittedly a solid one, which is never taking his mask off. Before long, he's the top wrestler. He's doing talk shows, he's got tons of endorsements. Why are those called nutty oaks, not bat oaks? I want my delicious bat oaks, or bat flakes, ew. With his wealth secure, Wayne decides it's finally time for revenge. It's time to go after Hans. I'll get only one shot at him, and if I fail, it's over. The place he lives in is like an impregnable fortress. He's got armed bodyguards around the clock. His hands are lethal weapons. They say he fears nothing, but he's never faced Batman before. This panel is great. How he looks like the gargoyle rather than resting upon one. It's nice. Oh no, he's got Ozymandias TVs. You know who else he's channeling pretty hard? Bane. There's some Bane energy in this. Next, he goes to visit Frederick Grant, who's fallen on some hard times since being released from prison, but not anymore, because now he's gonna be his gadget guy and partner. He also asks him to pretend to own the mansion and he'll pretend to be his bodyguard. No, don't pseudo Iron Man it up. Don't do it. So Grant makes him night vision goggles, some sensors that magnify sound, wings to glide on air currents, and Kevlar so he doesn't just get shot. Wayne wanted to have the abilities of a bat, so the being bulletproof is just an added bonus. Is his bat friend still alive? I haven't seen him for a bit. I was invested in their friendship. A man and his bat. Okay, so he's got the tech. That means it's time to take on Hans. Yeah, it's Batman the wrestler, boss. Ain't nobody got a chance against my fists. I got the notches on my gloves to prove it. There's notches on his gloves. Got news for you, Hans. You're not up against a helpless teenager now. If you're worried about Wayne just potentially outing his identity like that, don't worry about it, because Hans not only does not notice, but Wayne kills him. He's Golden Age Batman now. I'll crush you like a grape. Forget it. This time my back's not turned. A guy learns a lot in the ring. Sometimes you do better laying down. No! Thud. Jason Todd approves. That's for my parents' slime ball. And for me. I prayed for somebody to free me from Hans, but not this. Not murder. Nita, whoever you really are, your mask doesn't give you the right to kill. Nita, you don't understand. How do you know my name? No, seriously, how does he know her name? Hans never called her name in front of him during that confrontation they had. I only learned it because he says it later on in the book. I guess Wayne probably read it in a newspaper somewhere. He was obsessively researching Hans. But from Nita's perspective, it's very unsettling. It's still unsettling from my perspective a bit, just calling her by her name like that, Nita. Also, now he has a bizarre level of interest in her. It's gone from she's foxy to I'm going to keep her in my life no matter what. I can't tell you yet. She's got no job, no place to go. I'll have Grant contact her, say he needs a secretary. No matter what she thinks of me, I want her in my life. No matter what she thinks of me, I want her in my life. The most disturbing thing about that statement from a narrative standpoint is that it creates a parallel between him and Hans. Hans was frequently shown in this saying she had to marry him, and by the end he said he loved her and it didn't matter if she loved him. Marry him or he would kill her. This is not that extreme, but it's still disregarding her feelings and manipulating her and lying to her. This poor woman. Just out of one abusive situation potentially into another. And so after seeing an overarching villain being set up for this Just Imagine series, we see papers circulating the streets saying Batman strikes. So is he wanted now? Is that why he had to give Grant his house? How far out did he plan this? Don't think on it. Just imagine. Batman. The end. The This story is not bad at all. In fact, it's very solid, but is it a good Batman story? On its own, it's a very well done revenge fantasy story. You can feel for the things that happen to Wayne and the injustices he suffers, and want to see him get his own against hands. Potentially, if you're not off-put by how bitter and cynical he is at the start. Some may identify with it, others might not. In the way the story is structured, it's satisfying to see him build himself up and become this terrifying Batman. The story also seeds its details well, such as having him learn sewing in prison and later be glad that he learned it because it helps him make his costume. It's little things like that, but the story beats for the most part build upon each other, and the conclusion it builds to would be right at home in an action flick. As for a take on Batman and heroism, it fares less well. Wayne Williams is not the most heroic person, and we spend a lot of time with him, so are well aware he is extremely self-motivated. He mentions at one point after he recruits Grant, just once, "My father was a cop, gunned down in cold blood. My mother died of a broken heart because I was framed and sent to jail. I want to crush the human vermin who prey on helpless people." But that hasn't been backed up prior in the issue at all. The only person he's ever talked about taking down his hands because of what happened to him personally. Aside from Grant, he hasn't helped anybody else outside of self-motivated reasons. Nita because she was hot and it spurred him into action, and then later in the Warden breakout because it reminded him of his dad. He hasn't shown an inclination to want to make the city better or improve people's lives. The fact that people are shown to be inspired by him at the end is incidental. He even says in the story he doesn't know what he'll do after he kills hands. And that's the main focus. It would be like if Batman became Batman solely to murder Joe Chill and not to right the injustice of what happened to him and his parents to ensure it never happened to anyone else. In Bruce, the anger and thirst for vengeance is channeled and transformed, and they flare up in his less healthy iterations. Here the vengeance and rage are first and paramount, which again doesn't make for a bad story by any means, but for a story trying to channel the core Batman theme, not so much. Which is in and of itself an interesting thing to ponder. Is this how Stan Lee views Batman? Just a cold-blooded vengeance machine, like one of those Arnold Schwarzenegger movies. Wayne Williams in this completely stops existing as a person. He gives himself to the Batman and just exists for vengeance. We don't see him have friends or form personal ties or live a life outside of trying to get hands, which would match some people's view of the Batman character. But Batman Bruce is more complex than a simple vengeance machine, and at times has a complex relationship with being Batman. How much he is or isn't Bruce has changed over the years, so that may have been reflected here as well. Now there are some cool updates here in this story. When Wayne says his costume is for striking fear, heck yeah it does. A giant accurate bat? No thank you. Also his slightly sweet friendship with that bat does provide a better foundation for him picking it as his emblem. Even though while a bat flew through my window is silly, that is a bit hard to say, in reality I have heard of far flimsier forms of inspiration. Aside from comparisons to DC's Batman, which are inevitable because this is just imagine Marvel Batman basically, there are moments where one also finds themselves looking back at Marvel creations and seeing parallels there. Strong Uncle Ben Spider-Man vibes with his dad, only he never fully comes to embrace the idea of responsibility or being inspired by him. It's just kind of an open, bitter wound there. And then of course we have the wrestling. There's some Luke Cage in there, being framed and then transformed in prison. On the DC side, there's also a lot of Bane. Bane grew up in prison. He was born there, in the darkness, molded by it, and eventually was forced to hone himself and make himself terrifying by working against his greatest fear, bats. It was that hatred of bats that ignited his obsession with Batman. There are some strong similarities here in how Bane trained his mind, his body, amassed resources, and then went in for that back break. It's very similar to how Wayne approaches taking down hands. So if this was just imagine Bane, I'd say nailed it. Even the wrestling would work because Bane wears that luchador mask. Also, and this is just personally, I would have cut the way that he has ties to Nita or reorganized it so it occurs differently. Maybe have Nita seek him out in some capacity. The whole I'll hire her as my secretary so I can keep her close to me, it just makes me feel like he rented the movie Secretary too many times, or has a very unhealthy idea of how he's going to form this relationship with Nita that I'm concerned about. Still, this is an interesting take and a fun exercise. Wayne Williams does continue on in this universe as Batman, and when seen in JLA, his attitude is that he's here to help. So he's decided to keep being Batman. His own comic doesn't give him a firm reason to, other than, well, what else is he gonna do? And helping people, I guess. Plus, he needs to join the JLA, and they give him red eyes, which is cool. Would you have read a full series about Wayne Williams? Do you like his costume? How do you feel it hit the Batman themes? Do you disagree with me entirely, think it hit them excellently, spot on? It was like a chef's kiss, but then it didn't happen. Share all your thoughts down below. I love hearing them, and puns if you can. Please do all the YouTube things, like, share, comment, subscribe, and thanks so much to Established Tiles for sponsoring this video, and of course, I will see you all again soon. Bye-bye.